Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, everyone. We're pleased to have you here with us this morning. I am Anton Sayalan, the Chief Evangelist for Luminary Learning Solutions, and I will be the voice of the webinar this morning. Welcome to the Reset and Go webinar series, designed with the anticipation of getting everyone back on track in terms of mindset. Setting the right precedent is important with this series, and this is our disclaimer. We're here not to discuss the obvious. We're not here to dissect the impact. We're here to contemplate the way forward. This is the axis of the series, panning out over the next 11 days. We will commence our webinar shortly. As usual, here are some house rules for everyone joining in. If you do wish to ask a question, please use the chat option at any point during the session, and similar questions would be clubbed together. The format, as always, will be 40 minutes of discussion, followed by 20 minutes of Q&A. And there will be a summary by the host to aid those joining this webinar at various points. The topic for the session this morning, dealing with the financial impact of the crisis. It seems that with every step forward, we have taken 2 steps back. Pandemic-induced recession or crisis, dealing with the aftermath. How do we look forward is the question. What can we look forward to? How can we deal without being blindsided, as an organization and as individuals? Today, our discussion pivots around looking ahead and planning out the way forward, financially speaking. Our guest this morning, Saminda Weerasinghe, a private equity specialist and a corporate trainer. Cedric Wijegunawardene, Chief Financial Officer, Silvermills Group. Imran Furqan, CEO, Recession, Australia. Our host this morning is Aashiq country head A to Z Infra Services and managing partner of Icon Partners Limited and a trainer at Luminary Learning Solutions. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Aashiq, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, and a very good morning and a warm welcome to all of you joining us here today from Sri Lanka and around the world for yet another session of the Reset and Go webinar series conducted by Luminary Learning. In this series so far, we've covered the areas of working from home and how to put your teams back in action. In all such discussions, focus on practical solutions for different organizations facing an unprecedented. There are now more than 2.6 million people affected, and nearly 185,000. In Sri Lanka alone, this number is at 130 and 7. This is a shock that affects us at an individual. So today, let's start with a little background and dive into the conversation. The pandemic has resulted in an unprecedented disruption to the economic cycles of almost all countries and every sector, some more than others. Since the outbreak, once global economy contracted as countries one by one started closing their borders and lockdowns forced local transactions and economic activity to be essential survival. We are facing shocks, high and financial, facing financial triple blow. It seems daunting. Where are we now? It's been over a month of lockdown and people are testing themselves personally and through work. We have come to accept it now, want to find ways of getting back on our feet, like Anton suggested. Listening to us today are professionals and leads, and especially finance teams facing new challenges in keeping up their operations afloat. So can we start the conversation? Quick snapshot. I'd like to invite Imran to start off and start speaking, dealing in terms of the impact and how new market dynamics have come about, and then move on to the other questions and start engaging after. So I'd like to invite Imran.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everybody, and I'm glad to be here. Just the economic impact of the epidemic, pandemic context. Mind you, please understand that these estimations have been done in the midst of a crisis, and therefore the amount of data available for those who are doing the analysis is limited. So take it with a bit of salt in terms of the analysis, right? So the IMF says, look, we're going to have a hit of about $9 trillion. Output is going to be taken out over the next 2 years. Now this is, to put it in context, the size of the economies of Japan, Germany, right? Now that's the International Labour Organization says that about 200 million full-time jobs are at risk, but of course, I don't know how many more time and casual. The World Trade Organization says we can have a contraction of trade between 13 and 13%, right? And that's a global scenario, right? Now, moving to South Asia.
Imran, I'm going to stop you for a second. Yes. Aashiq, just hold on for a second. We're getting a couple of messages, and I'm actually hearing this too. There seems to be a couple of echoes. It might be our signals dropping at the server end. Bear with us. A quick announcements to everyone. Humble apologies. Welcome to Challenges with all of this. There is a huge amount of people who have logged in. So in the interest of everyone, we're going to quickly reboot our system, re-log in. So give us 2 minutes and we will be back with all of you. So we're going to go offline and just come back in 2 minutes. Just bear with us.
Sure.
Okay.
Not live. Good morning, everyone. We're back. And the topic this morning is dealing with the financial impact of the crisis. Joining us this morning is Saminda Weerasinghe, private equity specialist and corporate trainer. We've got Cedric Wijegunawardene, Chief Financial Officer. Silvermills Group. Our host Aashiq, over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Anton. Sorry guys for the slight drop, but we are back in action now, and I'd like to welcome you all back. So where we left off, so let's start with that. So the question was posed at Imran Furkan to put us in perspective right now, the fact that we are in shock and new market dynamics have emerged. and the impact is now making more sense. So I'd like to invite Imran once again to put this in perspective. Imran, over to you.
Imran's on mute.
I'd like to stop you there. Could you, everyone please unmute their mics? Thank you.
That includes me.
That includes you. Go on, Imran.
Yeah, hi. So hi everybody, and it's nice to be back with you again. Thank you for being with us. We're going to look at the global impact first, and we're going to move to South Asia, and then we're going to look at Sri Lanka, right? Because we are living in an ecosystem, right? So we are not immune from what's happening globally, right? So the IMF is going to have a peak of around $9 trillion, right? So when you look at the context of the economies, that's the size of, moving Germany, Japan out of the ecosystem, which is significant. Of course, these statistics are generated at a time, data is not very clear. So you need to sort, but nevertheless, the size then the World Organization thinks that you're going to have a decline of 22%. I think it might be 200 million part-time jobs. You cannot imagine how many part-time jobs, right? Coming to South Asia, right? The World Bank forecasts that some of the economies in South Asia will go into recession. That includes Sri Lanka, where it's between 0.5 and 3%, minus 0.5 minus 3%. Pakistan could go into recession. Growth will slow in India and Bangladesh, who want to have growth and not negative growth. The economies are so big, there's some level of natural growth. The Maldives is going to go into a recession as well. I know Sri Lanka has a lot of connections with the Maldives as well. Now, having said that, almost all economists, 100%, think that we will come out of it, because we wouldn't be having this discussion had we not come out of previous crises, right? And that is something that people don't understand in the middle of a crisis. So there's a couple of patterns that they think that we're going to come out of it. A V-shaped one would be the best, where we have gone down very fast but recover very quickly. IMF looks at a V-shaped recovery over 2 years, which I think is a little optimistic. Then today I saw that they think it's a U-shaped recovery, a much more slower one. Others think it will be like a T-shaped one, so you have a rapid fall but a very slow rise, like the 90s push. And the others who think it's going to be a W-shaped recovery, right? Where you're going to have a double dip recession because the virus might come back. Before I actually open it up to others, I did a small survey. I was doing a webinar for ACCA last week, and I had the opportunity to get members across South Asia, and I put a poll for them, and they're quite evenly divided, really. I mean, there's quite a few people who think it's a V-shaped one. So these are all accountants from around South Asia, right, including a lot from Sri Lanka as well. It's a very interesting time. Nobody really knows, but you know two things actually. One, never as we did before. Right, and that is for sure. And the second thing is.
Thanks. I'd like to ask Saminda on your perspective, where you come from. How do you see the dynamics playing out?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Just to add on to what actually Imran mentioned at the beginning, more towards the latter part of his discussion, was that the shapes of the recovery. Very true, absolutely. Just to touch a little bit on that, so this recession or sort of an economic downturn was expected from 2018, 2019 onwards. If you look at economic commentary coming from Rubini, people like Ray Dalio, who runs very successful hedge funds out of the US, these were expected because of the fact that the credit levels in the market was just soaring. Markets were up for the last 8 to 10 years, and they were expected to come down to a certain extent. But unfortunately, with the pandemic coming out, that sort of triggered the entire thing, so to say. But in terms of how we, this is just my input on this thing, Imran. In terms of how we look at a recovery is based on, I think, three main factors is that what is the severity, the depth the pandemic will bring in to the economy? What is the duration the pandemic will hold in terms of its livelihood within the ecosystem? And most importantly is, can this convert into a deflationary environment? If all of these three boxes get ticked, I'm not scaring anybody, but this well could turn into a depression. Like what we see in the 1930s, what we saw in the 1930s. Even when you look at the swine flu which came out, we didn't see such a huge impact to the economy because the economies were not so linked at that time. The supply chains, the sophistication of the instruments, the markets were not so great as what we see at the moment. So it all depends of the depth, duration, and the fact that whether this would bring in deflationary impact into the economy. So based on that, I personally feel that it will change shape. Hence, if it doesn't go into deflation and the severity is less, like many have expected, I think a V-shaped recovery should come out. But however, if there is duration that plays in with the pandemic coming in, we would see the uptick getting delayed. So we may see like a U or a wobbly U coming into picture.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I can move on to Cedric to see his perspective quickly before we move on with more of the questions. In terms of your background in manufacturing and local production and things like that, how do you see the dynamics unfolding here?
Yeah, so what I see is okay, there is a mixture of problems that are new set of problems that are propped up with these. I mean, in terms of a cash crunch and having problems with your customers and all that stuff. But I also see an opportunity coming because there is a shift. Now, for instance, there's a shift into e-commerce. So there are opportunities coming in. So, you know, it's a mixture of opportunities plus the problems that you have. Also, if you look at governments across the world, starting from this, kind of moving towards protectionism. Yeah. So, you know, then there are new sectors emerging, say the health sector. So there will be opportunities coming in as we go along, as we tag along. So it's just a matter, it's a balance of how you would balance your current scenario and how would you gain the opportunities that lie ahead. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Actually, a little bit realistic. I'm sure here, like even Imran, and the optimism is definitely there. Let's move on now. Actually, the questions that we have at hand and dealing with crisis, when we get back or getting us back on our feet again. So this crisis does have stakes, and most of us in people who are leading businesses, financing, struggling with on priorities. Short term, mid term, broadly speaking of sectors and organizations, what do you guys think of the mentality? How we should approach this problem? So can we start? Anyone can have the first go. Saminda,
yeah, good. I think like Imran very correctly said in his opening comments that we wouldn't be living here, we wouldn't be talking if we didn't survive the historic or the old crises. So we face downturns in the economy, we face downturns in personal life. We put them back and we become resilient and we become much stronger personally as well as businesses. Businesses become leaner when they survive situations like this. So I would like to look at this, pitching gentlemen, I would like to look at this from a restructuring perspective, because now the crisis has come, it has hit, so there's no point in crying, there's no point in lamenting in terms of, oh, this, that, and the other. It's just that we need to strategize turn around and then run. That's it. So from a operational finance perspective, from an organizational perspective, I would say we need to wear the caps of a restructuring cap in terms of how we take it forward. I know a lot of companies are looking at the downsizing as well as reducing, slashing its pay bills, salary bills, and they are now looking at slowly commencing their operations in terms of coming back into business. So how I would look at it is I would consider that people and cash are prime, is very important at this moment. Securing business cash is very important. So I would say
Yeah, we can hear you, Saminda. You can go on.
All right, okay. So securing cash is very important at this moment. So I would say businesses need to focus on cash flows. I wouldn't even mind proposing weekly cash flows for business units, where you look at your inflows as versus your outflows. Inflows may not come with sales immediately. You have your data collection that you can look at. For your sales, you may have your stock already that you can slowly disseminate into the system. Is there
Okay, so Imran, if we can hear you, we can move on to you.
Yes,
is that okay?
I think. Yeah, thank you. I think while we wait for Saminda to come back in. Look, from my perspective, I look at it a little bit more differently, right? So I would decide on how I would respond based on. Yeah, hi.
I reduce the volume. I reduce the volume. Okay.
So what I would do is I would look at how you respond depending on how I think the recovery will occur. So for example, I see a lot of organizations making statements that could have long-lasting damages for them. For example, I've seen big companies make statements saying we're going to have 30% salary cuts, 50% salary cuts. My question is that even legal, right? And I know that it's not legal because you can't arbitrarily cut an employee's salary unless the employee agrees, right? And also there is some flexibility for the labor commissioner and all that, but those are down the road, right? And unless the employee gives you a written writing saying that they can do that, you can do that. Legally, you're not able to do that. You can work on some other things like performance-based, all sorts of discretionary allowances. But I think you have to be very careful in the decisions that you make as a finance professional. Get it cleared by legal, get it cleared by HR, right? You cannot just simply add on a finance component to it because there are other implications as well. And I'll tell you where the problem is. The problem here is one of those employees, say they are in the apparel industry or somewhere else, goes and puts a case in the labor tribunal, for example, right? And this can drag on for many years, and there can be many global publicity around it. Your brand can get damaged significantly, right? So the best thing to do first is to understand there's going to be a V, U, W, because the steps that you take have to be in line with where you think they're coming back on, right? And number two is you need to also understand the implications on reputation and so on as well. Cash flow is critical, and I completely agree with Saminda on cash flow and people, but I also think you have to think of this very strategically, and you should not necessarily just react, but you need to also, be proactive in terms of, securing your recovery, because if you don't secure your recovery, that you might survive the next 3 months or 6 months, you're going to have huge reputational damages as you go along. So I think you need to be very careful how you play as well. Yeah, just want to add that point.
Yeah, so before I come to Saminda to answer that, I'd like to ask Cedric now. What's your position or your opinion in addressing this in the short term?
Yes. So let me add on to what Imran and Saminda also said. So let me summarize it in such a way that, shall I say some what you should not do, right? So one is panic reaction, right? Sometimes I see tremendous panic across all the markets. So instead of panic response, you should consider the business implications. It are scenario-based assumptions. I mean, it must be a very well planned response rather than just get into arbitrary. Okay, everyone else is doing. It's like the herd theory of what the UK followed. Everyone else is doing this, so you just follow doing it. No, you must do what's best for your own business. So that's number one. Number two is you should not search for instant weight loss. So everyone immediately looks at HR. Okay, cut down on training, cut down on employees, cut down on their remuneration, because you must always look at the fact that your business is it's a going concern. You are not looking at only the next 6 months of survival. It's a going concern. So you must lock all your high performers, protect your IPs. Don't lose your high performers in the whole process. You might end up having the crap and lose all your high performers. So that's number two. You should not get into a shell. Also kind of have a wait and see attitude. What I mean is basically do nothing. Instead, look for opportunities in the turbulence. Gear yourself for a takeoff, because at some point of time there is going to be a takeoff. Yeah. Then the third, final one is don't breathe recycled negative sentiments to your staff and to all the people around you. Right. So my approach is light a candle rather than curse the darkness. Yeah.
May I add something to what Cedric said?
Like the approach that you took in terms of looking at it from a more human side of things, which I think, like what Imran and also Saminda saying, that we need actually a balance. Saminda, would you like to add on to that before we move on?
Yes, please. Yeah, Cedric mentioned very good point was that look at scenario-based modeling. Just want to add on to that, because scenario-based modeling is very important even you want to put a proposal across to the bank at this very moment. Because you may have a best case scenario, you may have a worst case scenario. Your supply may give you raw materials a good month delayed. Your debtor may give you money a good 2 months delayed, right? So you may have those scenarios that you need to play around. And those are very important when you're putting across a proposal to the bank, because banks are used to these crisis situations of companies. They are willing to give. Local banks are willing to look at it in terms of moratoriums, delay, deferments, but they don't. Banks don't like surprises. Banks hate surprises. My suggestion is be open with your bank. Give the scenarios that you have within your business. These are the cash flows that I have. These are the instances. These are the uncertainties of these cash flows. And the bank knows exactly then where your shortfalls come in, which months, which weeks, if you are doing a cash flow in a weekly basis. And from a forecast perspective, what I would like to tell is just looking at a historic trend, averaging it out, dragging it through is not a forecast. Anybody can do that. In a situation like this, we really need to model risk into our system. Risk is uncertainty. Risk is uncertain. So how do we model uncertainty? As operational finance people in the finance department, you guys are the best who would understand the sensitive variables of your business. So take the sensitive variables and play around with those. You simulate. You can run, how you could be proactive ways. You look at the standard deviations or the variances of those sensitivities during historic crisis periods, how they have moved. Apply that into the current context. See, once you apply them, how your results, how your profits, how your valuations are going to end up with. That's being more proactive, analytical in terms of a forecast, not just looking at a historic trend, averaging it out and dragging it through. That is not going to make any sense in coming out of this problem. And just one more thing is that a lot of companies, big companies, they've already moved into, they would have been in middle of capital expansion, middle of M&A deals. So what now? So what's going to happen now for those? If you are to look at an NPV calculation on the current dynamics for those, none of those are not going to make any positive NPVs. My suggestion is not to look at them on a current NPV. Do you have the flexibility to delay it? do you have the flexibility to incur routine cost or whatever and delay it further? It's like looking at these from I know it's a little sophisticated, but looking at it from a more real option perspective, whether you can actually harness these from a delayed this thing. Because one thing, yes, you need to keep your current crisis, you need to be on top of the crisis in terms of the cash. You model that, and then secondary, if you have already committed to larger scale capital expenditure or projects, you look at it from a real option perspective, if that makes any sense from your organization's perspective.
Yeah. So, Saminda, just moving on from that, Imran, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. One thing that what I want to add is number one is something to what Saminda said is, look, the assumptions that you're looking at. Now, what I have found very favorable in past experiences is to talk to stakeholders to get a view on what they think are their own assumptions. I'll give you two examples. One is with finance providers, right? So I have casual conversations with finance providers and finance leaders, so bank CEOs, CFOs, on an ongoing basis, right? Because they're professionals and you know them. So when you talk to them, their internal assumptions are sometimes completely different to what external economists or professionals may say. If you want your proposal to be accepted by, say, a bank, for example, or other finance providers, the more your thinking is aligned with their thinking, your chances of being accepted is much higher than, say, for example, making your own assumptions alone, in isolation and taking it to them. Number one. Number two is with employees. Now, what I do very casually and very regularly is also to talk to them in terms of, what are your assumptions on the ongoing basis. So, for example, if they think that this crisis is once in a 100-year crisis, right? They might be much more willing to take a short-term salary cut, and the percentages they are thinking of could be much more than even you had anticipated. So they are willing to take a cut, right, in terms of saving the organizations, but you would know that if you take an arbitrary cut. So that's when I see CEOs and boards, sending out internal memos without any sort of consultation. I immediately, contact the CEO or the board member privately and say, what are you doing, right? A little bit of consultation does help. Right, and I can tell you a very good example in a private capacity. I noticed that a lot of people did not celebrate the Sinhala and Tamil New Year in the way that they had done before, right? And why was that? It was because the government and the media continuously gave a message saying you need to make sacrifices. I was astonished, right, at the amount of sacrifices people made. And what made me understand is that they were willing to make a sacrifice because they understood the gravity of the situation. But you wouldn't know that unless you interacted with that stakeholder as well. So my key point here is, if you're looking at different stakeholders, first talk to them, right? Before you start any scenario or assumption, get their view, right? And this changes also, so you have to be regularly in touch with them. Incorporate that in as well, because your chances of getting a bank proposal approved or salary cut accepted is much higher than if you do it arbitrarily.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I believe where we find ourselves right now is also like what Cedric said, is that we are in a sort of a panic mode right now. A lot of things are happening. So maybe we need a bit of fine tuning, but organizations, I'm sure, committed to delivering whatever they can right now to stay afloat. Okay, so this brings me,
just let me tell a tagline that hit my mind quite recently. It says like this: it's not the crisis that you people to business, it's your business response to the crisis. Crisis will never cripple your business. It's how you respond to the crisis that will cripple your business. Or
absolutely.
Absolutely, yes. I agree 100% with you, Cedric. Thanks a lot. And thank you for putting that in. So I'd like to move on to another thing, but before that, I'd like to summarize for those who may have joined just now, a little before. So we are talking about dealing with the financial impact of this crisis. We've got an excellent panel on board, and we've been discussing the macro level impact that this has had globally and regionally and in Sri Lanka. We've discussed what sort of market dynamics that we will have to face going forward, and how do we actually find resolve and start engaging our companies and our people in finding solutions together with our stakeholders, together with our financial partners in getting back to business. Gentlemen, I'd like to also set our sights on, yes, now there are challenges, and we've discussed this in going to bank scenario planning. How do teams right now look at an overall perspective? I know bank is, or financial institution is one, but how do we actually look at two things? One is funding strategies overall, because I'm sure most of these problems they're facing, we need to start looking at funding strategies. We discussed a little bit about costing, but how do we look at costing structures and so on and so forth to improve our cash position? And also, I'm sure, given this entrepreneurs, business leads, many people are looking at new opportunities, like Cedric mentioned, yeah? So like online and so on and so forth. How does one deal with this? How does one make sure that they have enough money to support the current position? How does one reallocate in order to do new things? So yesterday there was a nice point that was raised in terms of reallocating human resources to more productive tasks so that ROI could be seen that way. So similarly, how do we engage financially on this? Let's start with you, and then Cedric and Saminda.
Yeah, I think what you need to do first is have, before you allocate or do anything, you need to have, updated information, right? That is critical. Updated information is critical. And the same report that I mentioned before, right? It said that 47% of respondents had not done a financial reforecast since this crisis started maybe a couple of months ago. And this leaves me shocking that we have not, because we are in the process of worrying about day-to-day survival, right? Where do I get my food? Is my staff, how am I going to get them to work? We're not doing the reforecasting as fast as possible. I would say the first thing that you do is do a reforecasting of your financials, maybe even on a weekly basis. I think Cedric was talking about this before, right? Weekly, daily basis, if you can, if your systems are in place, right? And also, I would also look at, I am very reluctant to do what other people say in terms of, discounting or sell, items for a quick sale. I am very against these, panic mode driven, responses to finances, right? Obviously, we need to secure payroll and we need to secure things like utility payments. But beyond that, I think we have to be very, very careful in terms of balancing short-term gain, and survival. In terms of very long-term damage that you do for yourself and your brand and so on. So sometimes, even scaling down completely to shut down operations sometimes can be, much more financially and cash-wise saving than trying to have a skeletal operation. And that's something that you need to look at as well, right? Depending on the size of your operation. A lot of people are not doing that. A lot of people are, telling me, no, I need to have a skeletal operation. And I'm telling them, look at the dynamics of that, and sometimes just doing nothing, if you can afford to do that, helps, because you're looking at, you gives you time to breathe, and that is an option not a lot of people are really looking at, because even if you are, like, this is the challenge that is being faced to the apparel industry, right? For Bangladeshi manufacturers and even for some of Sri Lanka's manufacturers, the brands have told them, look, we will honor some of your contracts, okay? That doesn't mean that they will pay immediately, right? And also, so therefore, you are trying desperately to get something off the ground at very high, freight rates, at very high, in terms of cost of procuring, the imports to make the exports. So for me, one option that I'm telling bigger players who can afford to do this is actually completely shut down. Right? And think about the safety of your employees for a short period of time. Number two is that the obvious things that you can do in terms of discounting, tapping in banks, the facilities that you already have, looking at multiple lenders that you may have not looked before, right? There are companies I know who will never approach certain banks or certain types of financing, right? Alternative financing that they do. I think this is the time to look at a whole range of options that you have, but always remember one thing, right? When you go and seek financing in a crisis, you are going to pay a massive amount in terms of fees, in terms of surcharges, and you have to do the balance. That is why a futures contract for crude oil, right, for May, June, is negative, because it costs more to store. There is no storage capacity, so sellers are willing to pay buyers, right, to take this answer, because they are looking at it from a very macro kind of perspective, right, and they are not looking at very short-term things. For them, shutting down a plant, right, for fuel, it costs more than paying a buyer. Now, that is a very long-term view of looking at something. They're not looking at short-term survival. Short-term survival means prices are so low. Let me just, shut down my pumping and so on. But the cost of keeping these infrastructure going, and I was talking to a CEO of a very large hotel chain, right? Yesterday, she was messaging me and I was messaging her. Again, it goes back to the assumptions that you're making. In the public perspective, everybody thinks tourism industry is in trouble, right? But the kind of assumptions they're making are far worse than experienced CEOs who know this industry. That is something I found extremely refreshing. In their private minds, right, they are looking at it in a completely different way, and that is important to understand. And one of the things that she was saying to me is, look, Imran, some things like, for example, machinery and so on, we need to keep going, because if not, the cost of trying to restart, is wrong. But other things, it makes sense sometimes just to close it. And that's something that you need to look at as well. So for me, the key point here is, as Cedric was saying before, when you're panicking, you make very expensive, costly decisions around finance. And I think that is my key point in terms of being careful.
Okay, so thanks a lot for that. I'd like to once again apologize for the technical difficulties we're undergoing, and thank you for your patience. So we predict that we would actually cross the bar of 10 o'clock and maybe have an extension on this, if you would permit me. I'd like to take this conversation to Cedric now, who is in the front lines. You have hands-on experience in production, dealing with a lot of people. How would you look at this in terms of making sure you have enough funding, making sure you have enough resources for new initiatives, switching production? How does that play out?
Yeah, for me, basically, once again, cash is king. Yeah. So I just go back about, say, 1.5 months back, before this whole lockdown took place. The day before the lockdown, I was having a chat with one of the leading bankers, and he told on a personal basis, Cedric, country situation is not too good. You better withdraw physical cash and keep it home. So just before the lockdown, I withdrew about 200,000 bucks, kept it at home, and then for the first 3 weeks, because all these online things did not work, credit cards were not accepted, we had to rely on various vendors and all stuff. So, physical cash became very handy. Yeah, because it took a while for the Keels and the Food Cities and the Apicos to really fit in. So once again, the same thing transpires to the business also. So firstly, what a business should do is, you should do a liquid test. You should see how much cash, physical cash you have with you, without any encumbrances with banks or anything. So you must take that. Then on the other side, what you have to do is, you have to look at what your fixed costs are, looking at a worst case scenario. Worst case, so you take out all the provisions. So from a cash basis, on a month-on-month basis, what is going to be your fixed outflow, assuming that the business is at a standstill. So then you have the cash that you have the expenses, and then you can see, if you do nothing, for how many months can the company run its operation. Same like the country, if you look at Sri Lanka or any other country, they look at the number of months imports that you have. Yeah, the country. So assume you do nothing, how long can you survive? So that's the first acid test that you need to do from a business perspective. So that then you know whether you have deep pockets or whether you don't have deep pockets. And if you don't have deep pockets, then you have to look at rationalizing cost or whatnot. Then I think some of the other speakers discussed various other areas that you can plug the bleeds that could take place. One is debtors. You need to manage your debtors. So the problems that we have, the debtors also would similarly have, whether it's in US or Europe or anywhere, or even locally, depending on where your debtors are. So they might also ask for extended credit. You must ensure that your credit terms would preclude or reduce the risk of you having bad debts. Then you need to manage your inventories because the demand patterns of the world have changing. So you need to ensure that you don't have any obsolete stocks. If possible, defer certain capex, manage your creditors. And just one thing I would like to, before I sum up, there's one thing that I would like to say is, again, you have to look at also cut down excess fat. Now, you need to look behind the curtain and cut down any unnecessary cost. But usually what happens is that the tendency is to deep dive into staff related costs. That's the first area that everyone would look at. So my take is first look at the other areas. Maybe there may be a lot of wastage in terms of utility. If it's a production, you might be having production wastage. Look at plugging all that, and chances are that, because this is an opportunity where a rare opportunity that staff also, because they know that what's there for them if the organization doesn't succeed. So they also would support the management. So team up, work together. And these are rare occasions that they'll also team up with you. Put your heads together, get ideas, and try to first see as to how you can rationalize your cost. If that doesn't work, then yes, you might have to, again, with the consent of the employees and all that, look at how best you can, cut down cost for the betterment of, to ensure that you can sustain yourself financially during this crisis period. Yeah.
Okay. So picking up from that, Saminda, you represent capital markets, right? So could you shed light on this? How do companies actually prepare themselves? How do we beef up? How do we look at business positively from now onwards? How can we arrange, come up with strategies for that?
Good. Okay. All right. I think I'll take off from where Cedric stopped, because very important point that he put across is cash is king. Absolutely. Cash is king at this very moment. So how I would look at it and how I would advise my clients also is that short term is where the panic, so to say, it plays around. So first most important thing I would say is you keep your emotions off when you're doing this forecast, when you're planning it out. You bring in emotions into the system, you're going to panic. You're not going to look at it very technically. This situation, this uncertainty, this crisis needs for us to look at things very technically, not with emotions. So you take your emotions off, put it aside. You look at the situation, you look at the troubles, you look at the problems technically, give them proper answers where emotions don't overcloud your solutions. So short term, like I said initially, I would even go into weekly based cash flows, because like what Cedric said, immediate deficits, you cannot go to the capital markets to borrow. Those will take time. Either the owner pumps in cash, either debtor brings in, you collect debtor, or your bank has to help you out. It's just very simple. You cannot go just starting a dialogue, giving out a proposal, talking business, showing returns to an investor. This takes it's a long drawn process. So immediate situation is you need to fight, you need to find resources within yourself and the bank. You need to be very open, clear with the bank in terms of what exact deficits are we looking at, what kind of moratorium would we require, and where our money kicks in at what point. Till then, we need to take an interval from the bank, so to say. Get a request for an interval from the bank, because our cash flows need to be very practical and show that, okay, till this time, my sales are not going to kick in. I will not be able to do any production. But from this point onwards, yes, my production will kick in, my stock will be sold, my distribution will happen. Yes, my revenue is coming in. I am using my assets efficiently, because whatever assets you have, including human resource, needs to be used efficiently. Optimally used, most efficiently used, so that you get the best yield out of all those asset classes that I spoke about within the business. These are things that we can control, not things that we can't control. So we have a cash flow. We know exactly where our surpluses start kicking in. Then we tell the bank, okay, we start paying at least interest or whatever, and then we have breathing space. We create a reserve. We have a reserve being built. So the bank also has the confidence that these guys are on the right track, right path in terms of the forecast, in terms of planning ahead to solve the crisis. And you may have third party debt providers in your system. Let's not forget that it's not only the banks that a balance sheet has. You have third-party debt providers in the system. But sad to say, at this time, you need to prioritize your bank relationships and go forward. That doesn't mean that you cannot forget about your third-party debt provider. So how I would look at it from a third-party debt facilitation is be a little creative in terms of your return to your third party, because there you have more flexibility to discuss rather than a bank, because banks would want the interest or the capital payment. But from a third-party perspective, you could restructure or you could structure your funding yes, a moratorium, but there's a sweetener at the end. It could be a convertible option to your equity. It could be an option where you can do a buyback at a certain point in the future, where the third party guy also is not at a loss in this situation. He's in line with you. You give him a board seat, so he has he sees how the governing is being done within the system. These are a bit of creative or financial engineering aspect of things that we can bring in from the capital markets. So the third party guys, so if the forecast goes well, if your business plan goes well, so they also make a return in the future in terms of a multiple, where you could offer him a buyback, you could offer him a put option at the end of the scenario, or a convertible option where he turns it into equity at that point. And you're looking at an exit mechanism into an IPO or trade sale or whatever from a capital markets perspective. So what I would say is you take things in hand very practically, reduce the window of forecast weekly for the next good 6 months or 4 months. Then you could do a month on month going forward. Then, because after a certain point, there is even uncertain in terms of what you forecast. So it's a matter of being practical in terms of what you're forecasting, right? Your scenario planning. So yeah, I would approach it like that from even a capital perspective, because then once all of that is in place, during the period, even the bank is giving you a moratorium, you have some breathing space for your business to start slowly kick in. Simultaneously, your corporate planning guys can do your business plan, your investor pitch for a private equity company or a larger lender, right? So when things come into right pace, when you are slightly taking off, you are at a position where you are now showing your business to potential investors, you know? So this is a situation where you need to look very creative. You need to be more open-minded in terms of how to grow your business from this point. It's not end game. You can definitely come out with a very good scientific restructuring plan.
Okay, thanks. So I'd like to pose to the panel a question that has just come up from the audience. This is Adrian's question. It says, what are your thoughts on overburdening on short-term debt for either government or fiscal spending or working capital for companies to fight the downturn? Can you hear me?
Yeah, could you repeat the question again, Aashiq?
Yeah, he wants thoughts, okay, on short-term debt for either government or fiscal spending or working capital for companies to fight the downturn. Your thoughts on that? Okay,
can I pitch in?
Yep, you can start.
All right, so short-term debt, the negativity of a short-term debt is because of the fact that you need to pay off your capital faster. So for that to happen, your operating cash flows need to kick in for you to settle the short-term debt to go forward. I'm not exactly sure what he means by a short-term. Is it something that he means if it's a LC, a backlog LC opening, where you cannot settle the LCs off, but you need to also open up new LCs for your stock to be brought in or raw material to be bought in? That's a matter of discussion with the bank. You know, we could couple it, we could bundle it, we could convert it into a term facility where it's been settled off slowly by the improving cash flows, but you have now room to open a fresh LC to bring your raw material down. Because if you don't have fresh LCs to bring your raw material down, then you won't be able to produce anything going forward. Okay, so that's one answer to it. However, if he means whether we are using our short-term debt for us to look at long-term investments, there is a maturity mismatch in that. There is a risk inherent to that strategy. So from my perspective, short-term debt, the risk is the fact that you need to settle off your capital faster. And then you need to be comfortable that your operating cash flows are going to support that mechanism.
Anyone else would like to move on to the next?
Yeah, let me just add a little bit on that, particularly from a macro perspective, because I think Adrian wanted to know that part as well. Look, I think from a Sri Lankan government perspective, I personally believe, right? We actually, South Asian governments are lucky that they don't actually have the capacity to kind of borrow and spend huge amounts in the short term, like say the West does, right? Where they, the US and the Australian one, because ultimately it's debt, right? You add on debt and you're not sure of the long-term capacity to repay. And I think we are going to be actually quite well off because we're making a lot more tough decisions faster. For example, we announced the tax cuts, individual tax cuts and company tax cuts right after the presidential election. Obviously, a lot of professionals were, saying they were not sustainable, and now there is a way of actually coming out of those tax cuts and being more fiscally prudent, simply because of the crisis, and we don't have the capacity to borrow and get over this short-term thing. So sometimes being tightened, really, it makes you think of actual long-term survival, not really short-term survival. So actually, I'm quite positive of the fact that we are not borrowing from a fiscal perspective in the short term because we don't have the capacity, right? I think we will be better off as a country and a region as South Asia because of that.
Okay, so I'd like to move on to more the future, right? So this pandemic has taken us all by surprise, and I'm sure everyone thought that yes, we are going into a global recession at this time, but then this is further blow. But see, as companies, we need to build resilience. Okay, so what are your comments on doing so, building the right infrastructure? How do we build resilience within companies for us to face the future? Because it seems that these crisis cycles have been shortening. So we'll be facing more of these in time to come rather than less. So I'd like to start with Imran for more macro level, and then we move on.
Yeah, I think the first thing you need to do, whether it's from a corporate perspective or from a national perspective, is create confidence in yourself, so that your followers follow you on the journey that you take out of the crisis. Okay, so if you take it from a national perspective, why are people talking about great political leaders from South Korea or New Zealand or Singapore, or not Singapore much anymore, but from other parts of the world? Because they were transparent. Right, they created trust in their leadership, so that people will go with them on this journey. So when I see corporate CEOs or CFOs take rash decisions around salary cuts or whatever, I know that you have a cash flow issue and you need to look at it. But what you display is that you're displaying that you are unable to control the situation, that events are ahead of you, right? And that is not the kind of image you want to create if you want to create a resilient organization that goes up with you. Yes, you have to be transparent in terms of the challenges that you face. So here is our cash flow situation. This is what we need to do. Please support me on this journey, but you do not panic. And it makes me, I'm keenly observing companies that have existed for 150, 180, 200 years. There are two companies that have existed for 200 years, right? Or 150, 200 years. One is a response, the chairman and CEO says, we are not doing any salary cuts. Yes, we have challenges. We're going to come up with it. And then you have another one that says, across the board, we have 30% or 50% salary cuts. And we're going, who do you think the employees would want to follow out of this crisis? Who do you think that they want to be with, right? And go on forward. So I think that whatever you do needs to be done in a very transparent way. The first thing to build resilience is to create trust. Leadership should be about creating trust, and then also the trust in terms of their plans, and then you have the employees go and all stakeholders.
Thanks. So I'd like to move this on to Cedric in terms of how do we structure ourselves for the future and be more resilient?
Yeah. We have to look at the opportunities that technology. So first we have to identity
There seems to be some disturbance on that end. Saminda, would you like to carry on? Would you have any?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I think I'm actually 200% with Imran on the leadership matter. I think leaders need to be benevolent. They need to show it through action. They need to, like you very correctly said, it has to be transparent. I mean, even a salary cut is inevitable from a business perspective. You need to be very clear about it with your staff. Hey guys, including me, entire team, we're going to take a hit, but this is our plan for it. This is how we plan for the next 6 months, next 1 year. This is how we are going to build the business from this point. And when it comes out, you guys are going to benefit. You guys are going to be the first to benefit. We are looking at good salary increments at that time, motivate, reward people for their positive behavior. That's the worst that can happen, is negativity building in the team. Like I said initially, you have to be on top of the crisis. For you to be on top of the crisis, you need to govern that respect and that leadership role from your team. Transparency, benevolent leadership is very important to building that resilience of that nature that what we require. And I would like to bring in, always think out of the box. Look into different strategies, re-strategizing how you put across your business, how you put across your product, what new platforms can you bring in, how can you bring innovation into the picture. If innovation was not a part of the ingredient of your soup before, bring innovation in, bring R&D in this situation. Not to invest as such, but going forward, strategizing. So resilience is being built within first. It has to come from as a human aspect, and then you go on to innovation, going into new redo your business model, new distribution channels, digitalize your system, things like that. But initially, crisis situation, it's leadership, transparency, that I think is what is required.
Yeah, Cedric, if you can back online. Are you ready?
Yeah. So Imran and Saminda has covered, I think, most of the areas that I also wanted to cover. But again, on just another area that I want to cover is that there are a lot of opportunities that will prop up. So once again, you look at the World Bank, the IMF, everyone. There is the health sector, for instance. The health sector is going to get a lot of prominence as we tag along. So those are areas that, if it's a garment industry, people at the garment, you can look at various new opportunities rather than only focus on certain brand, working for certain brands. So new opportunities will come. Keep your eyes open and try to grab them. Once again, if you look at the food industry, government is looking at, obviously, all the governments are looking at protectionism and, kind of focus on developing the domestic industry. So there'll be, whether it's processing of food products, food, you name it. So everything that's produced abroad, there'll be opportunities to produce it here, and maybe even at concessionary bank rates and the government sponsoring. So keep your eyes open. I don't think you should have a tunnel vision and do what was done in the past. So you have to work with open mind.
Yeah, I love the idea as well in terms of trying to develop the capability within. And I think a lot of economies were trying to do it initially, but now Sri Lanka's got a wake-up call. So that's quite refreshing. Actually, we'd like to move into.
Sorry, just another thing that just popped up into my mind. It's just that now in the past, if you look, say, for the last pre-COVID, everything was driven on cost. So why did everyone go to China? Because China was the cheapest the cost destination, right? Whether it's the US, everyone looked at cost. But post-COVID, I think there's going to be a little bit of a change in how people would look at things. They'll also look at security. So cost alone is not going to be the determinant. So that's where Sri Lanka can kind of fit in. Yeah, I see a lot of opportunities there.
That's lovely. That's quite a good point. Thank you so much. So we would also not want to avoid the hard question of personal finances, right? So, but before that, I'd like to sandwich one thing, personal, and this question came from the audience in terms of, okay, if we are in crisis right now, in terms of investments, how would we look at it? Companies or individuals? Before we go into the personal finances area, like quickly, what are your thoughts on investing in these times?
Yeah, let me chip in. So immediately, from a business perspective, we will look at things quite differently, unlike in the past. So, because the immediate thing is to protect your cash flows that you have, what's the cash that's available with you, because the funding agencies like banks and all that would no longer be willing as it was in the past. Yeah. So they also would take a more restricted approach because their cash flows and everything are also kind of severely restrained. So unless otherwise there is a compelling business case, my personal thought would be to just defer it as much as possible.
Okay. Any thoughts, Saminda? Saminda, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, in terms of investment, I'll look at it from, like I said initially in one of the earlier previous discussions, I was pitching in is that if you have already committed towards an M&A, or if you have already committed towards a capital expansion, then looking at it on a very technical ground, like, looking at it from a real option perspective is a different thing altogether, because if you look at a current NPV of its revenue dynamics and all of that, it might not be very profitable to move into it. But down the line, with things improving, sometimes the opportunity that you've got at the moment may be too precious for you to let it go. So you need to evaluate it very technically on those grounds. But from an investment perspective, how I look at it is the risk appetite that you have. The risk, when I say risk appetite, I think it sort of fits individual investment as well, because I would say risk appetite is the culmination of willingness to take risk and the ability to take risk. The problem in so many cases is that you don't have the ability to take risk, but you have the willingness to take risk, and you go ahead. And then when things like this happens in the market, then you have no area to look at. So you need to be very careful. If you look at a bank, I'm just giving you an example. Look at how banks do operations. They are governed to have stipulated capital adequacy ratios, liquidity ratios. There is proper risk assessment before they move in with expansion. Their new strategies, their new investments are always risk adjusted. But how many times do a corporate look at a risk adjusted investment perspective? How many times would you look at from a group perspective what your group liquidity is, solvency levels are, your basic current assets, asset tests, interest coverage, cash interest coverage? What are those compared to the risk that you are going to go ahead with? That's what I'm saying, ability to take risk. If you are able to take risk, if you are sitting on super reserves, if you're strong, I said this is a good time for you to start buying slowly in, because you're buying it at cheaper levels in the market. I'm talking about capital markets. I'm talking about capital market investment. So you're buying low, you're averaging it down when you come in. It's a good time, because they say you move in when you see the blood on the road, and you move out when you hear the first trumpets. But if you don't have the strength to do that, please move out. Capital protection is very important. Don't lose whatever that you have at the moment. So it all depends how strong you are, how strong your cash, your balance sheet is in terms of investment. It's a very broad area to answer actually within a 2-3 minute time span. But I would say risk appetite, that is willingness to take risk and ability to take risk, where I would say very clearly ability to take risk would supersede willingness to take risk. So the people within the business are the best to judge that.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure it's a topic by itself, but sorry to put you in a position like that, but these are questions coming in. Imran, would you like to weigh in on that?
Yeah, very quickly, two things. Number one, I split it into two things, okay? Number one is the best investment that you can make is in yourself, okay? And I don't agree with many people, finance people, who don't understand the importance of investing in teams and developing the human resources. Because I've been in offices with CEOs who showed me equipment worth millions of dollars not being used. When I asked them why, we don't know, our people don't know how to use it. right? From ERP systems to manufacturing systems to robotic process automation. So I'm asking them, why did you buy it, right? So investing in yourself as an individual. So for example, we are going to see a movement into digitization. What does that mean from a finance perspective? You need to know things like robotic process automation. There are some courses that you can do. Do not invest in degrees. Do not invest in paper qualifications. They're completely useless, and I think that is going to be very visible in the coming years, right? Invest in things that are going to help you be part of that journey to digitalization. Okay, so you can do a course in robotic process automation. You can learn about software in finance and accounting, right? You can do some of them for free. You can learn about empathy. I don't know whether Luminary has a course, but if you haven't learned about empathy, because that's something I'm trying to learn, right? I have a little bit of that. I'm learning. Empathy is a very critical skill to have in any time. Then on the other side, in terms of personal investments, I invest in companies that have three things. Number one, a very strong balance sheet, right? Which is going to be even more critical, as both Cedric and Saminda said. That is the number one critical aspect. I'm not a great fan of physical assets, because not only even in a crisis, but even in the normal circumstances, you can't liquidate in a hurry, right? Physical assets that have so many buildings and land and so on. Cash, in terms of actual cash on the balance sheet. Number two, if you control a tech or other ecosystem, right? So that is why I'm a great believer in things like Amazon, because they control the whole loop of the tech ecosystem. Microsoft is a whole loop. PicMe is now a whole loop system. That is why they pivot. For example, they're going to be listed this year or next year. Zulfa tells me. So, I mean, obviously, you are going to look at a situation where they control the loop, right? So they can take your bread and they can deliver it to you, and they can take your payment as well. Beautiful, loop in terms of ecosystem. And the third, type of companies I invest in is very interesting. Is people, is organizations that are developing, real, transformative processors, not just in terms of, for example, a software or a methodology, but in terms of how people think and react. Okay, so for example, I don't want to talk about specific stocks because there is investment and ethical perspective to it. But there are organizations that are genuinely transforming the way you think and act. And if you look at the number of downloads of the app or something like that, you see a big rise in that, because they are getting into the mindset of the people. I don't agree with when people say don't use emotion in finance. I think that's absolutely crap, because people make decisions based on emotions and not, sadly, based on financial perspective. You need to factor that in, and obviously you need not to be emotional once you have made a decision. That is critical, right? But humans are humans, and they will always be humans, and therefore you need to have a little bit of emotion in finance and decision making as well. So those are things. Invest in yourself, and if you're doing other investment, make sure there are specific criteria that match them before you put your money or hand over to somebody else.
Let me just also chip in. Now, let us also look at the flip side of the coin. This might also be, if you have the adequate resources, if you're cash rich, this might be the ideal time to look at acquisitions and mergers, which at a price which is unimaginable.
I don't agree. I don't agree, Cedric. I don't agree with that, because that is one thing that I have been very specific to our clients, right? You are going to be offered companies, right, today that you are dreaming and salivating to buy. But I assure you, those companies, if they are being offered to you now, there is a reason why they are being offered to you now, right? They are either a lemon, right? Their business model has gone crazy, and I wouldn't buy a single thing to it. I would put it into my own business to grow organically, grow my people, because you can start any business almost overnight, unless of course you're looking at property and land, which you need a specific property, a specific land. I wouldn't buy a single company today, because if they are being offered to you, there's a problem with it.
Yeah, I think, can I pitch into that?
Yeah.
Hello? Aashiq, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. So we have about just 5 minutes or something to go. So we would like to move into personal finance. So Saminda, if you could quickly then say something, say what you have to say.
Yeah, I think I agree with Imran, because if something's offered at this very moment, there's something wrong, because you've gone only a month and a half in this crisis, and then a company can't survive during that 1 month. There is absolutely some issue with that business model. There is something wrong with the business model, and if you want to get into it, you be very careful in your due diligence before getting into it. That's it. Yeah, that's what I want to mention, because it's a very tricky decision to make, because I understand. At the beginning I said that yes, it's a good opportunity to buy, but it's in capital markets. Stocks are coming down based on emotions, so there's a lot of behavioral finance that is affecting that. So yeah, capitalize on those. That's a different story. But if a company is offered for you to take control and run this very moment, just 1 month down the situation, the road, there is something wrong with that, baby. Yes, you have to be very careful.
Okay, so we quickly move into personal finances now. See, this crisis has not only affected organizations but individuals at their personal level. So would like to spend some time, a little bit of the last few minutes we have, to talk about that very fact. Okay, how does one at an individual level manage themselves? We're talking about loss of income, maybe company or pay cuts or whatever you want to call it. But how do we do it? We touched on the subject a little before in terms of how people's mindset has changed. But what are your thoughts on that, and how can we actually survive for the month or 2 or 3 that is ahead of us? So I'd like to start off with Cedric.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Moving on to personal finances, Cedric, what would like to understand, or your thoughts on how do we manage ourselves going forward in the next 1 or 2 months, 3 months, building, see, as much as companies need to build reserve and look after themselves to stay afloat, how does one on a personal level look at this issue?
Basically, first of all, you need to prioritize your expenditure also. I mean, like the government is now bringing various restrictions on imports and all that. So, what you did in the past might not hold for the future. So you have to be restrictive in your expenditure. Ensure that you run on credit. Try to manage the budget. But you should ideally save for a rainy day. Yeah. So that will be my immediate thought. You should not run on borrowed funds. That's critically critical.
I'm sure you're fully ready with that, because you went to the bank just before you have the kitty ready. So a point very well taken. Saminda, have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was actually going to do the same thing when you gave me the chance, because he took 200,000 off just before the crisis. Anyways, okay. On a personal note, I think let's look at it. What Cedric said is absolutely right. This is a situation where you need to calm yourself down a bit, taper down your unnecessary investment, unnecessary expenditure, and keep control of your expenses. Okay, from a personal finance perspective, would like to bring a couple of these things. One is that it's always good. I mean, we preach corporates do your cash flows. Why don't you do a cash for yourself? If you are getting a monthly salary and that salary is going to sort of slash 30% or 40%, or if you are into consultancy like me and then you don't know when your next payment comes in after your with the assignments coming in, so you need to build up your own cash flows. Why don't you do your own cash flows? What are my incomes? What are the assignments that I have done? What's going to come in? What are my expenditures? So obviously, if your incomes are short of your expenses, yes. Where do I curtail? Where do I bring in austerity measures personally? You know what I mean? So that's one. Have the habit of building your own cash flows, keeping yourself also on track. Whether it's a good, even it's a good period. have the control in terms of where your numbers are moving. Always have a quick glance of how your cash flow is, how your cash is moving in your bank balance. What are the expenditures? What are the checks that you've written? So have your own accounts so that you are in control of your numbers. Two is if you have invested something at the moment, I think capital protection is prime at this very moment without looking at a lot of returns per se. So bring in measures that you enhance capital protection, where you can convert your investments into short-term treasuries or whatever, or a fixed deposit where you have capital protection rather than you have open for any capital reduction in terms of a loss. However, having said that, again, risk appetite comes into picture. Ability to take risk and willingness to take risk. If you are able, if you have deep pockets and you are a very strategic investor, very smart investor, good time for you to look at risk-weighted investment strategies. Again, it's a big, broad area to discuss, but a few points that I can bring in. Because with this uncertainty coming into picture, obviously the risk premiums for debt instruments, risk premiums for equity instruments will grow. That means your cost of your discounting factors will increase, your valuations will deplete. So good time if you have deep pockets to look at investments. If you can allocate a little risk in your personal portfolio. But however, it all depends on your ability to take risk and willingness to take risk.
Okay, also shed light on what you said when you're doing cash flows. A lot of talk has also taken place in terms of people realizing the difference between needs and wants and lifestyle. Yeah. So Imran, would you like to add on to personal finances?
A couple of things. Number one, obviously, with what Cedric and Saminda said in terms of having an idea of what your cash flow position is critical, and on a daily basis, if possible, is very good. But I am also very keen believer that whatever actions you take, you need to carry your stakeholders with you, right? Whether your stakeholder is your spouse, your children, your grandparents, your or your employees, or because you come out of crisis. There are two aspects to a crisis. One is obviously the cash flow situation, and the other is the mental situation, right? And the mental situation, if that drops, you are in a situation of where you could fall sick, and trying to get medication in this few months is a disaster, right? And therefore, I think you need to make sure that you take your stakeholders with you, create awareness among them of the situation, take their buy-in. That is critical in terms of what you want to do in terms of personal finance. That's for me is critical, number one. Number two, I wouldn't do any investments in the next 3 months. I'm sorry, because this is a crisis none like any other in the last, say, 100 years, because it's a health crisis, right? Say, for example, I was having a chat with somebody who told me yesterday, Imran, we've been in Sri Lanka for all our lives, and we've never had curfew for more than 3 days, even or maybe a week during last year and so on. Nobody knows how this situation is going to unfold. So for me, I am making 0 investments in the next 3 months or the next 6 months, because the variables are too much for you to be able to manage it. So those are the 2 key points. Take your stakeholders, think very, very carefully about how much of the external things that you can control. And if you feel it's overwhelming, sometimes just don't make any investments, or even activity can be just slowed down, because making a critical error at this moment of time could bury you. Or if you are careful, we are going to come out of this crisis far stronger as a human race and as a human, as countries than I can ever imagine. I am more excited, in terms of coming out of this crisis. Obviously, the initial shock and all that, and the loss of life is very terrifying. But now I'm thinking, what an amazing opportunity to be alive, to be able to make these kind of changes, right? In a society that is more accepting of these changes, and we are going to, have huge upside. We didn't create this crisis. We didn't benefit from this. We didn't do anything to, unless you wash your hands and that kind of thing, right? We didn't contribute. So there's an opportunity for each of us to come out much stronger than from this crisis than has been for the last 80 to 100 years. That's my take. You're on mute, Aashiq. Aashiq, I think you're on mute. Yeah.
I'm very sorry about that. Sorry. So I'd like to thank you, and we've come to the last bit right now, and we'd like to draw this to a close. Apologize for the technical glitches that have taken place. That's prolonged this webinar more than we expected. I'd like to now pass this on to Cedric to give his final words and also address whatever he thought, have any thoughts in his mind. Please say his last words, and maybe the others as well to fill it in, and we'll complete the webinar. Cedric?
Yeah, so my conclusion is that you need to manage your cash flows. Cash flows are key. Cash is key. You need to survive during this difficult period, but it doesn't mean that it's a doom and gloom. So there is going to be once again a takeoff. You need to get your financial resources, get your human resources, get the technology, get everything geared up so that when the takeoff is ready, you can take off with it and go for exponential growth. So that's my final take.
Yep. I think almost similar to what Cedric mentioned. Cash is king. I've always believed in that. Cash is absolutely king. Do your forecast, plan it out, have a plan, make it a short term, medium term, and mid to long term. Have a steering committee, special team that is represented by all stakeholders in terms of within the company, where each represent each function of the business, so they take that sub leadership role of their function. As the leader, take control, be on top of the crisis all the time. When you have a good proper plan, yes, the scenario plays that we discussed about, the proposals that are being given to the banks, third-party funding, even pushing it to a probable investor in the midterm, all of those have to be a part of your recovery plan, your restructuring recovery plan. So if you plan and move ahead with the situation, I think what Cedric said is you're very well geared to take off once the situation arrests and then is arrested, and then you take off with the uptick of the economy. So final thoughts, as a nation, as Sri Lankans, we have been always a resilient bunch of people. History gives evidence to what I said. So resilience is important, and rise up Sri Lanka. That's it.
Good. Imran, your closing remarks.
Yeah. Look, today is one of the best days to be alive, right? And because we are here, and we're going through the initial part of the crisis. I think you need to two things to very quickly understand. One, invest in yourself. That is the best possible investment you can make. Right. And number two, make sure that you carry your stakeholders with you on this journey. And I think that is the two critical things you do. Yeah, you do your cash flow statements. Yes, you do everything else. But make sure that you invest in yourself and you carry your stakeholders with you. Then every financial decision you make will be the right one.
Aashiq, I think you're on mute.
Very sorry about it. Thank you very much for your comments, and we have almost at the end of this webinar dealing with the financial impact of the crisis. Your contributions have been invaluable, amazing input, and I'm sure many of us would walk away with things we could actually do and take action, speak to our teams, and get our businesses back on track with more focus. We also understand from the conversations that we had that organizations do really have it tough right now. And there are many decisions that have been that are being taken by organizations that they wouldn't do, or they regret rather, but they have to, or they're forced to. And our heart goes out to all of them, and I'm sure that everyone's doing their bit, and that we've helped them in some shape or form, so that they could do better, or for ourselves. We are also on a learning journey right now, as organizations are, everyone is. So we hope that we come out of it with a positive note, and I'm sure, like everyone else mentioned here in the panel, that is going to happen. We are in a cycle, and if we get our act together, definitely we will rise above and rise up. Sri Lanka, we will. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being the host of this panel today. I'd like to hand over the proceedings to Anton to bring it to a close. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Aashiq. Thank you, Imran, Cedric, and Saminda. And then Aashiq for expertly steering the conversation. Just a quick run as to understand that when faced with challenges, it is best to arm yourself with knowledge. And as we heard today, a financial crisis presents us significant change and challenge to be dealt with, but can also be a valuable learning experience and a stop on the road to make more stable financial times a healthier and a long-term attitude towards money. One of the takeaways would be that a financial crisis can actually inspire more frugal habits, better long-term planning, and even an attitude of gratitude for material possessions and other important things in life. When a crisis does arise, it forces us to reckon with ourselves and realign our views, face with courage that which we cannot change. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you will remember that you will repeat a mistake only until a lesson is learned. And let's take this learning and ensure we are poised for the future. We apologize once again for the technical glitches, but we hope that the extended time helped you to have a positive takeaway, that this webinar added some value and offered a new vantage point, that you will take away some insights that will help you in your transition back. Once again, we thank the H1 team for being with us and helping us through difficult technical issues that we faced. Thank you very much. Tomorrow, we're back with another session, which is staying fit and healthy during this time. And the panel for tomorrow will consist of Saminda Wijegunawardene from CEO from Mars Krida and Director Mars Apparel Board, Murtaza Yusufali, Managing Director Morrisons and Executive Director Mars Holdings, and Professor Wijegunawardene, National Professional Officer, Non-Communicable Diseases and Health, WHO Sri Lanka. Remember to log in at 9 a.m. It's tomorrow, Friday, 24th of April. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. Enjoy the rest of the day. Stay safe, stay productive.